Welcome to my channel. We recap new manhwa. If you like, so please share and subscribe this channel. When Lujinian's phone alarm sounded, Xiaoanhao was the first to rouse. Turning sideways, she realized that she had fallen asleep in Lujinian's arms. After about 2 seconds, the events from the previous night started coming back to her. Thunderstruck, she jumped off the bed and ran towards the toilet in a panic. Xiaoanhao's vigorous actions together with the phone's alarm woke Lujinian. As he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Xiaoanhao slipping into the toilet. Even though it was just a glance, he could clearly tell that she was completely naked, kiss marks marking her tender white skin. Snippets from the night before started returning to his mind. Xiaoanhao had climbed into his arms, kissing him, caressing him, slowly undressing him. Lujinian furrowed his eyebrows. Scanning the room, he took in the mess on the bed. In just about a second, he figured what had happened between the two of them. It was not a dream. Everything was real. Lujinian's eyes darkened as he clenched the blanket. The next second, he yanked it open and marched towards the bathroom, his face a mask of anger. Xiaoanhao shut the bathroom door, taking deep breaths. She had also drank alcohol the night before. After a long while, Xiaoanhao reached towards the shower with trembling hands. Just as she was about to calm herself with cold water, the shower door flew open. Lujinian charged in angrily. Grabbing her arm, he yanked her back. Reaching forward once again, he grabbed her neck, pushing her towards the wall behind. Frustrated, Lujinian did not control his strength and Xiaoanhao could feel pain throbbing down her back when he pushed her against the wall. Instinctively, she inhaled sharply. But before she could finish her inhale, Lujinian snarled, "Xiaoanhao, I never knew you had the ability to take advantage of me. How could you climb into my bed when I was drunk?" Just then, Lujinian seemed to have remembered something. His eyes lowered slightly. Exerting more strength, he pulled Xiaoanhao's chin upwards. Lifting her face, he stared into her eyes. With a tone as cold as ice, he hissed, "Xiaoanhao, if I remember correctly, on our wedding night, like a lofty woman, the first sentence you said was not to touch you. Now what? Just 2 months into the wedding and you can't wait to climb into my bed?" Lujinian remained expressionless, frost and indifference coating his gaze. As he spoke, he strengthened his arm on her neck, slowly emitting a dangerous air that left people trembling. Xiaoanhao's original anxious state intensified under his interrogation. Even her toes were trembling. She bit down on her lip, stunned for a long while, unable to say a word. Lujinian also stopped talking, seemingly patient. Silence fell on the room, and Lujinian continued to look unwaveringly at Xiaoanhao's pretty face. Xiaoanhao was a bundle of nerves as she felt her thoughts being read by Lujinian. Her heart raced, and just when she couldn't withstand the pressure any longer, Lujinian spoke, breaking the silence, "Or have you always wanted to be in my bed?" Xiaoanhao trembled in shock. Had he found out about her feelings? Panic flashed across her eyes. Trying desperately to hide her feelings, she blurted out, "I want a roll into the end of time." Lujinian stopped mid-sentence, unable to continue. Xiaoanhao may have spoken too fast, causing him to be lost in a trance. For a long while, he stood silent. She felt as though her heart was about to leap out of her throat. She struggled to calm down, staring straight at Lujinian's flawless face. Keeping her composure, Xiaoanhao continued, "As you know, it's been more than half a year since my debut, but I haven't taken on any substantial roles. Since you hold so much authority in this industry, just a word would definitely secure me a role into the end of time." Xiaoanhao froze briefly. After about 5 seconds, she pressed her lips into a tight line. Slowly, she continued, "Yesterday night was my payment." Registering her words, Lujinian's pupils shrunk sharply. As though trying to suppress his anger, the fingers on her neck started trembling. The next moment, he burst into laughter. "Xiaoanhao, are you trying to play with me?" Lujinian chuckled, a short laugh no more than 2 counts, before the smile disappeared. He glared sharply at her, and with a cruel tone soaked in frost said, "So you want to play with me? All right, I'll make sure to break you." Lujinian glared at Xiaoanhao with a murderous expression. Clenching his teeth, he spat out his last sentence before ruthlessly removing his hands from her neck. Without sparing her another glance, he left. "Play till your death." Xiaoanhao's long lashes trembled slightly as her face paled. She remained glued to the wall until a thundering door slam resounded. Only then did she swallow the saliva that had formed behind her tightly clasped lips. Exhausted, she collapsed to the ground, tears clouding her vision. Why would she climb into his bed just to act into the end of time? She just wanted to use it as an excuse to conceal her real feelings. Feelings only kept to herself. Her love for him. She loved him. She was secretly in love with him for the past 13 years, never daring or allowing herself to let him know. She thought that if she just concealed her feelings, everything would turn out all right. But never would she have known that one night, slightly intoxicated, she would expose her deepest secret. She had clearly overestimated her own abilities. Even though Xiaoanhao had infuriated Lujinian by climbing into his bed, she still received a phone call from To the End of Time crew 3 days later, informing her to go for an audition. It wasn't made known to her whether the audition was the director's decision or an order from Lujinian. Lujinian's assistant followed him into his office. "Mr. Lu, I've already booked the 12 a.m. flight to Rome. After touchdown, you can rest up to 15 hours before your next scene." After the long flight and a meeting that lasted the whole afternoon, Lujinian looked exhausted. Sitting in his office, he casually took out the phone he had on silent while listening to his assistant report his schedule. Just as he was about to lock his phone, a message came in. Lujinian smoothly clicked it open. To the End of Time filming completed. There'll be a celebratory banquet tonight at 8 p.m. in Jingchen Hotel. Do drop by if you have the time. Lujinian stared at the message for about 5 seconds before lifting his head indifferently. He nodded towards his assistant, acknowledging his report. Lujinian's assistant had been working for him for many years, hence he was well acquainted with his boss' aloof personality. Unperturbed by Lin Jinian's lack of concern, he continued, "Mr. Lu, there are about 6 hours before the airplane takes off. Would you like to have dinner in the city or at the airport?" "In the city," Lujinian replied faintly. Before his assistant could ask about the location, he continued, "Jingchen Hotel." When Lujinian and his assistant finished their meal, it was already 8:30 p.m. They footed the bill before proceeding to the main door. Just as they reached it, Lujinian stopped. His assistant stopped immediately as well. "Mr. Lu, is something wrong?" Lujinian remained silent for a while, and just when his assistant was started debating whether or not to repeat the question, he replied, "Wait for me in the car, I have something to do upstairs." He stood at the main door for a few more seconds before turning towards the lift. As part of the crew in To the End of Time, Xiaoanhao was naturally at the dinner. The minute she reached the city, she had hurriedly bathed, changed her clothes, done her hair, and applied light makeup before rushing to Jingchen Hotel. Despite preparing in record time, Xiaoanhao was still late for the dinner. When she reached, To the End of Time, director was already on the stage, addressing the crowd, expressing his gratitude. Since everyone was focused on the director, no one noticed Xiaoanhao's late arrival. She stood in the crowd, looking around before making a beeline for her manager Zhao Meng. After the director's brief speech, the dinner began. Since it was a banquet, socializing and alcohol were customary. Xiaoanhao wasn't an A-lister in the industry, but her pretty face, perfect figure, good personality, and eloquence allowed her to shine, so she fit in perfectly. Xiaoanhao was starving by the time she greeted everyone in the banquet. Without hesitation, she pulled Zhao Meng towards the buffet area. She filled her plate before randomly sitting down near a window. After a few bites, the originally boisterous banquet hall suddenly fell silent. Xiaoanhao lifted her head in curiosity as she continued to munch on her food. Following the direction of the crowd's gaze, she saw Lujinian. The memory from 3 months ago resurfaced. She remembered getting strangled by Lujinian after climbing into his bed. "Xiaoanhao, are you trying to play with me?" "Good, Xiaoanhao, you want to play? I'll play till the end." The grip she had on the chopsticks unconsciously tightened, and her heart pounded. He must have been very angry that day to have said such things. For the past 3 months, she had been hiding from him. Despite her efforts, she still met him in the end. Dressed in a well-fitted black suit, Lujinian's tall and trim physique was accentuated. As the bright lights in the banquet hall fell on his face, his originally exquisite facial features became three-dimensional. His sharp-nosed bridge, thin lips, strong brows were dazzling. The entertainment industry was saturated with good-looking people. One could easily pick out an entertainer that would stand out in the crowd. However, Lujinian was not just that, he possessed a unique charisma that would capture anyone's attention, easily making him the focal point anywhere. Silence fell in the room the minute he arrived. To the End of Time director was the first to come back to his senses. With a glass of wine in hand, he enthusiastically welcomed Lujinian, "Mr. Lu." The atmosphere gradually heated up after the director had spoken. Even though it was clear to everyone that their greetings wouldn't be reciprocated, it didn't stop them from greeting him. Lujinian strolled towards the seating area as though no one had spoken to him. Even though it was just a short stroll, he was still able to captivate everyone's attention. The director held on to the wine, fawning all over Lujinian with a smile plastered on his face. Xiaoan was eating in the seating area. Initially, when she was still a distance away from him with the crowd shielding her, she had the courage to look at him. But as he came closer, she only dared to sneak occasional peeks. When Lujinian was finally about to reach her, she didn't even dare to lift her head. Cautiously, she remained in her seat, motionless, no longer moving her chopsticks, no longer as carefree as before. Chairman Lu, why didn't you inform us that you were coming? I could have gotten someone to escort you. When the director's words reached Xiaoanhao's ears, she distinctly felt Lujinian walking towards her. Unconsciously, she tightened the grip on her chopsticks and straightened her back into a rod. As she focused on her plate of food, even her chewing started to slow, becoming careful. When Lujinian finally walked past her and Xiaoanhao was preparing to heave a sigh of relief, she realized that he had sat down in a chair behind her. Her palms got soaked with sweat from her anxiety. Lujinian and the director's conversation centered around movies and dramas. Even though Lujinian didn't say much, Xiaoanhao's heart trembled at his every word. No longer able to withstand the pressure, Xiaoanhao put down her chopsticks, threw the excuse of toilet to Zhao Meng, and stood up. But the moment she stood up, Lujinian stood up as well. Was it a coincidence or was it deliberate? The washroom was behind Xiaoanhao and the dining hall exit was behind Lujinian. Hence, just as she turned, he turned as well. Their gazes collided. Just a glance at Lujinian caused Xiaoanhao to frantically lower her head, avoiding his eyes. The two of them now have been married for 5 months, but the news had never been publicized. To the public, the two of them were strangers to each other. Xiaoanhao clenched her fists tightly, trying to calm her rapidly pounding heart. Attempting to act like everyone else, as though they were indeed strangers, she greeted him politely, "Good evening, Mr. Lu." Lujinian remained straight-faced, not moving, his gaze uncertain, giving the impression that he hadn't heard Xiaoanhao's greeting at all. After a long while, he suddenly blinked. Turning, he took a detour before taking long strides out the dining hall. From the very beginning, he hadn't taken a single glance at Xiaoanhao, as though the woman in front of him wasn't the wife he had married 5 months ago. Lujinian had a cold and aloof personality that made it difficult for others to get close. For the past 10 years since his debut, there wasn't any gossip or backlash. He has also built his own empire from scratch. It's said that he entered the industry as a poor boy without any background. After 4 years, his fame skyrocketed, and he clinched the Best Male Actor award for 6 consecutive years. Out of the 10 movies voted online as classics, he appeared in 6, in only 2 of them not as the lead. What's most unbelievable is that when Huaning Entertainment Company was facing bankruptcy issues, he took out all his savings to buy it. Everyone thought that he would go down together with the company, but in just 3 short years, he actually developed Huaning into the biggest entertainment company in the country. I wonder who this nation's husband will marry in the end. Now that you mention it, he debuted at 18. So he should be 28 now. Reasonably speaking, even if he doesn't get married, he should at least have a girlfriend. Why haven't there been any gossip? Yes. Girlfriend aside, he doesn't even have a female that he's intimate or close with. Such a mystery. Or maybe he doesn't like girls. Listening to their endless chatter, Zhao Meng couldn't hold back her curiosity. Lifting her head, she asked Xiaoanhao, who was directly in front of her, stirring her cup of coffee, "Why is he back in Beijing? Isn't his movie still ongoing?" Even though their marriage was kept a secret, Xiaoanhao still told Zhao Meng, who was not only her manager but also a longtime best friend. Hence, Xiaoanhao immediately understood who she was talking about even though Zhao Meng didn't specifically mention Lujinian. Her hand stopped momentarily. Looking up and into her friend's eyes, she shook her head, saying honestly, "I don't know." "You don't know?" Zhao Meng looked incredulous. "Miss Xiaoanhao, are you even his wife? He didn't even call to notify you when he came back from Rome?" Xiaoanhao continued to shake her head. "He didn't." Just then, Zhao Meng suddenly remembered that when her friend had bumped into Lujinian, he didn't even bother looking at her. At that time, she had thought that they were trying to cover up their marriage, but now, she realized that it wasn't the case. Zhao Meng frowned, continuing, "Are you guys like that in private?" Lujinian's assistant had already parked the car at the main entrance by the time Lujinian exited Jingchen Hotel. The minute his assistant saw him, he immediately came out to open the back door. Lujinian entered the car wordlessly. While closing the door, his assistant raised his head to peek at his boss' expression, only to find his face tight with his lips clenched into a straight line. The assistant definitely hadn't expected such an expression. He hurriedly closed the back door in a panic. Returning to his front seat, he started the engine and scooted out. Having worked for Lujinian for many years, his assistant could easily decipher his mood based on the smallest expressions. Whenever he clenched his lips so tightly, he was most likely not in the best mood. But he was feeling fine after dinner, so how could there be such a change? Did something happen just now? Even though he had his suspicion, the assistant couldn't muster enough courage to ask about it. He continued to drive steadily, only asking in a businesslike tone, "Mr. Lu, do you want to go directly to the airport?" Lujinian remained quiet. Silence suffused the car. Lujinian had a cold personality that prevented others from getting too close, and at that moment, he was emitting so much frost that the atmosphere in the car became suppressive and suffocating. The assistant continued to drive forward, no longer speaking, purely focusing on the road while anxiety slowly engulfed him. As the car steered from the second to third lane, the clear weather suddenly changed and it started pouring. To calm his own nerves, the assistant spoke again. "It's raining," he said. As the words fell, the rain intensified, rain droplets smashing furiously onto the car, producing a loud rhythmic paw sound. Lujinian continued to remain silent. Upon the second rejection, the assistant gave up, shutting his mouth. The rain continued to strengthen, blurring the vision ahead, and the car slowed. Just as the car was about to turn towards the airport, Lujinian suddenly said, "Stop the car." His voice was not loud, but it was enough for his assistant to hear. He immediately slammed the brakes, stopping the car. The assistant turned back towards Lujinian. "Mr. Lu, is something wrong?" Again, Lujinian stayed silent, both eyes staring out the car window at two students in uniforms. Both the girl and boy were running hurriedly through the rain. They ended up hiding under a building. After about 2 minutes, they left in a cab, but Lujinian's gaze remained glued to the spot under the building they had hid under. The assistant was bewildered. Impatient, the assistant asked again, "Mr. Lu?" Still, Lujinian remained silent. However, he seemed to be in a trance, his thoughts straying to a memory from many years ago. It was also raining heavily that day, and he and Xiaoanhao had both ran to the same old building for shelter. That was the first time they met. Both not saying a word, they looked at each other only to realize they were from the same school from their uniforms. "Mr. Lu?" After a seemingly long time, the assistant's voice sounded once again. Lujinian's brows twitched slightly. He turned his head slightly, his deep gaze calm, emotionless. "Mr. Lu, the plane will depart in 2 hours, we need to check in." Before the assistant could finish his sentence, Lujinian cut him off. "You can leave at the nearest taxi stand." "Huh?" the assistant asked in shock. He was just about to continue, but Lujinian added, "I'm not going to Rome today, change it to tomorrow morning." After the rain earlier, the flowers that were blooming in the front yard had all fallen, emitting a mixture of flower aroma and the smell of rain. Even though the villa was not far from the main gate, Xiaoanhao deliberately strolled towards it slowly. Lujinian was back from Rome. Would he be back tonight? Or was he already in the villa? After the incident 3 months ago, Xiaoanhao was not able to face him. The very thought of meeting him would cause her to shudder in fear and anxiety. Xiaoanhao stood at the door of the villa, eyes closed. She took several deep breaths before retrieving her keys to open the door. Other than 2 part-time cleaners, there were no other long-term helpers in the villa, causing it to seem extremely quiet. She stood at the entrance, scanning the living room. Confirming that there was no one, she slipped into her house slippers and slowly started upstairs. Only after making sure that the upstairs were also empty did she sigh inwardly, finally relaxing. He was not in the villa, but would he come back tonight? These past 3 months aside, after they got married, Lujinian would occasionally drop by Mianxiu Garden with no particular schedule but never later than 1 a.m. It was 12 a.m. night right now, so if he was not back in another hour, it was highly likely that he would not be coming back tonight. Time gradually crawled past Xiaoanhao's uneasy heart. When the clock hit 1 a.m., she finally relaxed her tensed body. She had been stressed the entire day, and now that she was able to relax, When she was about to squeeze toothpaste onto her toothbrush, she vaguely heard footsteps outside amid the splashing water. She froze, her hand unconsciously tightening her grip on the toothbrush. She stood at the sink area for a long while before pushing the bathroom door open. Outside, Lujinian was sitting on the sofa. Xiaoanhao had felt uneasy the whole night, not knowing if he was going to come back. Only when she saw daybreak did she finally calm down, knowing it was too late for him to come back. At this moment, she was not prepared to face him. Her heart sank, the familiar sense of fear and anxiety creeping up on her, overwhelming her. Hearing the door being pushed open, Lujinian turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping past Xiaoanhao without any emotion evident. She trembled when he glanced at her. Unconsciously, she looked away, quickly lowering her head. Even though she knew that she would be ignored if she spoke to him, after a slight hesitation, she still asked warmly, "You're back?" All she gave him was the tip of her head. She didn't even want to look at him. Lujinian clenched his lips, looking away coldly. Ignoring Xiaoanhao's words, he lifted his hand to unbutton his suit. Xiaoanhao was used to being ignored by Lujinian, but this time, probably due to the events 3 months ago, she could distinctly sense the frost radiating off him. She grew increasingly more nervous. He was dressed in pajamas and was sitting on the bed, the side that he usually slept on. With both hands behind his head, he rested, eyes closed. Next part coming soon. Thank you for watching.